So, my name is Dave Wall. I used to be living seas officer with Ulster Wildlife up to about 5, 6 years ago. And in that time, I was still working with the Irish Dolphin Group. And today, I am conservation officer with the Irish Dolphin Group, which is a fine and lofty title. Unfortunately, it doesn't bring any pay, but it's nonetheless, it's an interesting place to be. And what I'm going to talk to you about this evening are whales, dolphins, and porpoises in Northern Ireland, and give you a brief kind of overview of what you might see here, where you might see them, and we'll just dabble around some interesting little stories from around the coast over the past couple of years as well. So, cetaceans. Yes, let's explain this word first. Cetaceans means whales, dolphins, and porpoises. So you might hear me say cetaceans. That's just shorter form for saying whales, dolphins, and porpoises. To date, we have 26 species recorded around Ireland, so in water surrounding Ireland. 11 of these species are thought to breed within kind of what we'd consider Irish waters, or waters within, let's say, 200 miles of land surrounding the island of Ireland. What affects what we see? Well, the various habitats, as you can see there in the map, it's not all just grey sea with flat sand underneath. There's actually mountains and canyons and undersea rivers and slopes and humps and hollows and bumps and all sorts of different habitats under the sea. And much as on land, different species live in different habitats depending on their preference for food, etc. The west coast of Ireland, the bit you see sloping off into the deep water there, is a migratory route for large whale species moving from their foraging grounds in the north to their breeding grounds in the south. And all of this combined together makes Ireland, or Irish waters, some of the most important waters for Europe, for cetaceans in Europe. How about around the Northern Irish coast then? What do we have? Well, if we look at what type of habitats we have, mostly we have inshore coastal habitat, all the nooks and crannies around the coast, the bays, the harbours, the headlands. And we have what we call continental shelf habitat. That's waters that are shallower than 200 metres. Now, in a couple of areas along the back of Rathlin Island up here in the north, and in the North Channel between Scotland and Northern Ireland, there are deeper areas, but they generally don't go much deeper than about 250 metres. So mostly we have what we would consider shallow continental shelf waters. This then is the list of whale and dolphin species that have been recorded in waters around Ireland, and I will go through what's recorded locally in Northern Irish waters. You've got to memorize this list because I'm going to ask you questions on it later. By far, the most frequently encountered species are harbour porpoise and bottlenose dolphins. They probably account for 98%, maybe 99% of all sightings of whales and dolphins around the Northern Irish coastline. And that's because they're both species that have a hankering for inshore waters and shallow waters, and they're not at all scared to run up alongside the coastline. This is their kind of habitat. Species that occur here on a regular basis, basically every year we would see them to a greater or lesser degree, would be the common dolphin, minke whale, and killer whale. And then we've the odds and sods. We've occasional records of bristled dolphins, fin whales, humpback whales. We've vagrants such as beluga and bowhead whale. And then we've some species that we've only recorded ever from stranding. So they might be species from deeper waters that are just washing in around the coast. And then we've mostly deep water species that have never been recorded either alive or dead in Northern Irish waters. A little bit about what the Irish Dolphin Group do. We have a casual sighting scheme that's run from 1991 to 2004, so over 30 years of records, about 33,000 records in that database, and that forms a good part of the knowledge we have of where whales and dolphins and porpoises occur around the coastline. The records come in from the public, they're validated through our validation system, and once validated, they're put out there and they're available to view online through our website. We also run a constant effort sighting scheme where volunteers go out and they survey from a fixed point, usually a headland, for let's say an hour or 2 hours per survey. And basically, they record how many animals they see per watch. And to date, we've got about 1,000 plus effective watches. And that gives us a kind of more in-depth view or picture of how whales and dolphins use the coastline. But of course, it's limited to near shore sightings of whales and dolphins. We can't see beyond the horizon. And for most headlands, that's going to be about 8-10 kilometers offshore. The Irish Round Dolphin Group has also run a stranding scheme since 1991. To date, that's over 4,000 strandings. And what this gives us is really a picture of what's going on in the wider offshore area. So we get species that die offshore but wash in and strand on the coast. It's one of the largest stranding databases, certainly in Europe and possibly in the world. And it helps us both monitor changes from year to year and over time. But it also flags up unusual strandings, so where we get lots of animals stranding for a particular reason, that would flag to us that there's some issue of probably conservation importance. And we've had a few of those over the year. The stranding scheme, certainly in the Republic of Ireland, also operates a DNA sampling system, and we have a tissue bank operational in the National Museum in Dublin. And that basically has about 1,200 samples in it now. And that forms a resource for researchers worldwide in their study of whale, dolphin, and porpoise species. And finally, we run ferry surveys across the Irish Sea, 3 different routes from Belfast, Dublin, and Rosslare, monthly, ideally. And that gives us, again, fixed transect routes where we can monitor change over time. When we look at whales, dolphins, and porpoises, then what are we looking for? Well, we're looking for the features that enable us to tell one species from another. So the basic ID skills for whales, dolphins, porpoises focus on the shape and position of the dorsal fin, the shape of the head, if you're lucky enough to see it, the type of blow. So the blow is when the animal exhales, it exhales water vapor, which you can sometimes see, especially if the animal is a bigger animal, such as a whale. The number of animals, because some whale dolphin species like to live pretty solitary lives or in small groups, whereas others are very gregarious and form these big, large groups that you might see moving along the coast. And we can also get indicators from behavior and the various sizes of the animals. But by far our best friend in any sighting is photographs. If you can get a photograph, that will help us in 9 times out of 10 to clinch an ID of those animals. Similarly, with the strandings, photographs are key. And I suppose I just guide you in maybe away from taking those kind of lovely arty photos we take of the beach with strange angles with beautiful backgrounds behind them. These photos may look good on social media, but they're not very good for photo ID purposes or for identifying species. So we like kind of boring photos of the animals side on so we can see their markings, photos of the head of the animal so we can observe the teeth, which is very useful for identifying especially dolphin species. And if you're up to it, photos of the underside of the animals so we can tell which sex they are and gain that kind of detail of information. Okay, so our most common species is the harbour porpoise. So this is the one we see most frequently. It's a small animal, relatively small animal, about 1.8 meters, 4 feet, 5 feet long. As you can see there in this picture of a dead animal, they're uniformly kind of gunmetal grey above and white below. They have a small triangular dorsal fin halfway along the body, and no real distinct body pattern. They're generally found inshore, but they can also be found offshore over offshore banks. But they need shallower waters to feed because their max feeding depth is probably only 100 meters or so. They usually occur in small groups of 3 to 4, or singly or in small groups of 3 to 4 animals. But we have seen groups of up to 50 or 100 animals, particularly in the Celtic Sea area. So here's some maps that are at this stage, in fairness, getting slightly out of date. These run up to about 2011, but you can see here Harbour Porpoise, the Irish Sea is a stronghold, and we find them around the coast, but much more so in inshore areas. Have to say, with Harbour Porpoise, what we're seeing these days is a picture of a changing population. They have this ability to move as a population quite long distances and just change their area of focus. This happened in the North Sea some decades ago, where they moved from the North Sea to the southern North Sea en masse. And there's some indications that we're seeing a kind of a change or redistribution of Harbour Porpoise around the coast of Ireland at the moment, but we're still only gaining glimpses of it and trying to develop the picture as it forms. Around the coast of Northern Ireland, then, your best spots for spotting Harbour Porpoise are Bloody Bridge in County Down, Whitehead and Portmuck in Antrim in around Isla-Magee, and off Ramore Head and indeed Rathlin, around the back of Rathlin. I've never gone around there in a boat and not seen Harbour Porpoise. So those are good areas for spotting porpoises. But to spot a porpoise, you need really calm seas, nice flat calm seas, because they're quite small. They don't really show much of themselves at the surface. So you need to have a good day to spot them. The bad news, I suppose, if you're a porpoise is they're also our most commonly stranded cetacean species. And many of the porpoises that are stranded on the Northern Ireland coastlines show signs that they've been attacked by bottlenose dolphin. Bottlenose dolphin do this. We're not entirely sure why. Maybe it's competition for food. Maybe it's just a strange behavioral thing. They certainly don't eat them, but they're well known for killing Harbour Porpoise. And here's a case of Harbour Porpoise being attacked in Strangford Lough. So this happened in the Strangford Narrows a couple of years ago, and some lovely pictures there. So it's a pretty gruesome end for the porpoise, but also an interesting fact that we do get a lot of porpoises that seem to have died that way. Which brings us on to the bottlenose dolphin, our second most commonly encountered species. These are much larger animals. So people say, how do I tell between a Harbour porpoise and a dolphin? Well, the dolphin is about 3 or 4 times, the bottlenose dolphin is about 3 or 4 times the size of a Harbour porpoise. Much bigger animal, quite big and bulky, muscly type of cetacean. It's got a short, blunt beak that gives it its name. Its dorsal fin is sickle shaped rather than triangular, but also located halfway along the back. Unhelpfully for us, they are also gunmetal grey on top and white below, so similar coloration to the porpoise. But the size and the shape of the dorsal fin should be enough to tell one from the other. Around the coast of Ireland, there's 3 populations that we know of. These have been identified genetically. We have a coastal population numbering about 400 animals, and they travel right around the Irish coastline and probably up to West Scotland, and probably down around the French coast and up into the English Channel, and perhaps even down into the Bay of Biscay. But they very much hug the shore, and we track them using photo identification. We have an estuarine population living in the Shannon Estuary in Limerick, and that number is about 200 animals. That's pretty consistent in its size, and they rarely leave the estuary. They go out into Tralee Bay and a few other places, but mostly stay within the estuary. And then we have a vast offshore population, which may number in the tens or even hundreds of thousands. We're still not entirely sure, but there's a very large number of them. And they range over probably quite vast distances. We're not sure how far they range, but there's a lot of them out there, and they travel up and down offshore. Generally, for bottlenose dolphins, you'll see them in small to medium-sized groups, but offshore, it's not uncommon to see groups of a couple of hundred animals. There's the distribution map. So from the map, it looks like they're everywhere, but within that map, there's a sectioning of inshore, offshore, and estuarine. In Northern Ireland, then, the places to spot them by a long mile are the North Coast. So up around the area between Ballycastle and Rathlin, extending kind of westward to Portrush and Portstewart. The northeast coast gets a fair whack of sightings as well. You can also see them down along the County Down coast. We also have kind of semi-resident loners. Well, not quite loners, because in Strangford we've got two animals that have been loitering around there, around Strangford, between Strangford and Portaferry for not more than a year now, maybe going on 2 years. And in Carlingford Loch, we certainly had, I haven't heard any recent sightings of them, but an animal called Finn, which was a solitary bottlenose dolphin, which was loitering again between kind of Green Ore and Green Castle on the opposite side of the loch. So both groups of bottlenose dolphins, but also these solitary or almost solitary, more resident animals. I'd show you a quick, I'll cross my fingers and show you a quick example of these. So these are the two dolphins in Strangford. So like I say, they've been loitering around there certainly for the last year or two. And if you're on the ferry going across from Strangford to Portaferry, there's a fair chance you'll see them. I cut the sound out of this because there was much screaming and the odd curse as people got very excited. You can see they're doing all the typical bottlenosey, dolphin-y things that we expect bottlenose dolphins to do. Jumping and breaching and swimming around, and unfortunately killing the odd harbour porpoise. I suppose it's worth mentioning at this point as well that photo ID has been a real asset. So what is photo ID? So it's taking pictures of the dorsal fin, the back fin of the animal. Each of those is like a thumbprint. It's got scars and nicks and coloration that enables us to identify individuals within the population. By taking lots of pictures over all around the Irish coastline over time, we can track these animals from place to place. Here's a little explainer of how it works.
Our bottlenose photo identification project is a joint venture between AFBI and the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group, and the project really started with the aim to look at social media as a resource for collecting information on our coastal dolphins. And from here, the aim is really to look at where the animals go, so tracking individuals and seeing where they are moving around our coast. In waters around Northern Ireland and Donegal, we have two main species. We have the bottlenose dolphin and the common dolphin. The bottlenose is the focus of this project. They can cover these huge distances. By using social media, we have so many pairs of eyes on the water right across our coastline, and this just really maximises our chance of finding these animals and getting this much needed data.
Some species like bottlenose dolphins are very well marked, so they've got great notches and nicks in their dorsal fin. So if you photograph that and then get a nice picture, you can recognise individual dolphins and then follow their story, which is fantastic. I think dolphins are very much top predators, so they're great indicators of a healthy marine environment. So if your top predators like dolphins are doing well, then obviously everything on the food chain beneath that is doing well. So it's grand being able to monitor dolphin populations, but if you can monitor dolphins at the individual level, so it gives you much finer detail on that population. So if it is declining, you can tease apart where it's going wrong.
One of the most interesting things we've found so far is that we have bottlenose dolphins in our coastline all year round, so they're not the summer visitors that we once thought. One of our most favourite things that we've found is also that these individual animals are coming back year after year, so they're choosing to come back to this space, and that just shows how important our waters are for this species.
So people can get involved by taking a video or a picture using just your regular phone. If you upload it to social media using the Find a Fin hashtag, you can do it that way. Or we also have an Irish Whale and Dolphin Group reporting app, which you can upload images and videos and report it that way. We can use that information to protect them and protect their ecosystems. Anybody can take a photo when they're out for a walk or just at the beach and they see one, so that can add to our data. Currently the catalogue has 54 individuals, but we're adding to that every day.
One of the main things we'd like to do with the results of this project is bring our catalogue of individuals together with other organisations, so from the rest of Ireland, from the Hebrides in Scotland, right down to the Isle of Man and over to Wales, to see if we can track maybe some of our animals are going into their waters as well, and really getting an idea for the range of these animals and put our understanding in a bit of a wider context. Yeah, collaboration is huge in these kind of projects. These are highly mobile species. You know, while we call them our bottlenose dolphins, they could also be the Hebrides bottlenose dolphins or the Irish bottlenose dolphins, and we're not really sure how far they travel yet. The ones we get on our coastline. So it's really important that we build these links with other organisations and share our data across as many platforms as possible.
It really has opened up a whole new field, and of course, if you have an army of citizen scientists, it's incredibly powerful going forward, because you've got every coast covered, every little nook and cranny. So they're the guardians, they see changes. And when citizen scientists say, this is unusual, it's up to us as scientists to try and tease apart, well, what's the scientific drives behind that? But they're the ones that see things first and alert scientists and government to issues that might be coming down the line. And that we can then start using that data, adding that information to other sightings and strandings that people send in, and build a kind of an all-island picture and look at trends over time. It's win-win, and very, very powerful tool in conservation going forward.
Oh, lovely. Get off. Let's get rid of that. No, that's better. Oh, no, go on. Okay, so on to the kind of next most frequently encountered species, common dolphin. More of an offshore species, so you tend not to find these right up around the coastline. You tend to find them slightly offshore in deeper waters. They're a more streamlined version of the bottlenose dolphin, but quite clearly on their side, you can see this very clear hourglass shape. With cream up front and kind of pale flanks and this dark cape dipping down underneath the dorsal fin. They're often described as torpedo shaped, but they're very slick, streamlined dolphins. They're smaller than the bottlenose dolphins, but bigger than the porpoise, so kind of a mid-ground between the two. And they are capable of forming some very large supergroups. Certainly in the Irish Sea, we've seen groups of 1,000 or more. We find them right around the coast of Ireland. In the Irish Sea, they tend to be a bit seasonal, mainly occurring in spring, summer, into early autumn, and then in the winter, they seem to be largely absent. But around the rest of the coastline, they're present year-round, with a strong focus on the southwest. Around the Northern Irish coastline, then, the North Coast, offshore, and the North Channel are good areas to spot them, but you can't spot them almost anywhere around the coastline off the shore a bit. And unusually, last year, I think, or earlier last year, we had a solitary common dolphin in Carlingford Lough, which is quite an unusual one, but does happen from time to time. So this little beastie here turned up literally in Carlingford Marina, I think, and spent some time there. You might just get a glimpse of him there. You can see the hourglass pattern even under the water. You can see that relatively clearly. He'll stick his little head up here in a second. There we go. So common dolphin. And if you put that side by side with the bottlenose dolphin, it'd be not quite half the size, but not far off it. The next kind of candidate on our hit list of what you're likely to see around the coast of Northern Ireland with the minke whale. So it's really the only whale species that we encounter frequently. It's got a pointed head up here. This gives it its Latin name, and it has the dorsal fin 2/3 of the way along the body, not halfway, that would be a dolphin, but 2/3 of the way. So the whales have their dorsal fin 2/3 of the way along the back. So that's a good cue if you're watching something and you're not sure if it's a bottlenose dolphin or a minke whale. They have these characteristic white bands on their flippers, and they're a small, sleek whale. Now, when I say small, they can grow up to 10 meters, so if they landed on you, you'd be flattened, but relatively small for a cetacean. We mainly see them over the shelf and inshore, but also they can be spotted in offshore banks. You can see from this distribution map, they have a hankering for the inshore waters around the Irish coastline where they feed on pelagic schooling fish. In Northern Irish waters, then the hot spots, if you like, are off the north coast, up around between Rathlin and Port Stewart. And kind of the slightly offshore of Dundrum Bay, we seem to get regular sightings there during the summer months. Here's a quick video of some minke whale footage captured off Port Stewart by the North Coast Dara Ranger. So here you can see there's no blow, and they're pretty inconspicuous at the surface for a whale, but you will still see them at quite a distance. But on a flat cam sea, it can be tricky sometimes to judge whether you're looking at a whale or a dolphin. But that gap between when the head comes up and the tail or the dorsal fin appears gives you an indication that you're looking at something that's much longer than a dolphin. Now, get out of that. It's not all good news for minke whales. On a fairly regular basis, they do wash up on the County Down coastline, entangled in fishing gear, crab pots and that kind of fishing gear, which unfortunately is one of the main causes of death of minke whales, certainly around the Irish coastline. And even a couple of years ago, one stranded in Dundrum Bay and was quite remarkably rescued by a single guy in a wetsuit or in dry suit, so fair dues to him. He kind of aimed it back out to sea, gave it a push, and off it went. Killer whales are on that list of regular visitors, but they're by no means common. They're regular but infrequent visitors. Killer whales aren't actually whales because, as you can see from the picture there, the dorsal fin is halfway along the back. They're in fact the largest species of dolphin that we have. They can grow also up to about 9-10 meters, so the same as a minke whale. But they are very much a dolphin species. They've a pale white saddle patch behind the dorsal fin and a white eye patch, which makes them quite distinctive. We tend to have sightings of them inshore, especially around rocks where seals hang out, because they like to eat their way through seals. So they'll hang around seal colonies looking for a bit of grub. In waters around Ireland, nowadays, we only ever see one or two of them, usually two, a pair called John Coe and Aquarius. And these are the remnants of a population that existed around the Irish coastline and off the Scottish coast. And they were called the West Coast Community. They numbered, at one stage, probably 10 or more animals. But unfortunately, over the past few years, they've been dying away. And since
sorry, Dave. I think there's somebody. Can you please make sure you're muted, please, everyone? Because we're having a bit of interference here with the presentation from one of the participants. I think it's Aidan Jeffson. Can you make sure you're muted, please?
So since about 2014,
Thanks.
We haven't really cited any of the rest of this group. So it's not likely they all suddenly died. It's likely they moved off elsewhere because, unfortunately, in the 30 years that this group has been studied, they've never once produced a calf. And we think what's happening is pollutants in the water have interfered with their ability to breed. So over time, they've not produced any new young, and therefore the group is dying out. So it's a bit of a tragic tale for our only resident group of killer whales. In the next 10, 20 years, we'd expect that John Coe and John Coe and Aquarius will die out as well, and that'll be the end of that. So unfortunately, that'll mark the first extinction of a cetacean species around the coast of Ireland. Here's some pictures of them. They are quite unique in the North Atlantic in that their white eye patches slope downwards, which is unique to this particular group. There's been pictures of them since the 60s. Here's a group in the Strangford Narrows in the 1960s. You won't all, but some people may remember Dopey Dick in the River Foyle in 1977. And they were the kind of first times they came to prominence. But what we've discovered since, or we think we've discovered, we're 95% sure, is that the animal that was Dopey Dick is actually one of the West Coast community, and his name was Comet. And up until 2014, he was still alive. Now, we haven't seen him since 2014. So who knows? He may still be out there kicking around somewhere, or he may have succumbed to old age. Here's a little bit of video footage of killer whales in Strangford Lough in 2020, just to give you an idea of what they look like. So this is John Coe and Aquarius. And they came into the loch, presumably to hunt seals. Unfortunately, although the loch is one of the most protected areas in Northern Ireland, there was a fair bit of boat traffic that made its way out to them. And they left either due to disturbance or maybe there just weren't any seals around that day. But they spent a brief period in the loch. And some lovely footage was got. Now, we don't have all day to be watching that footage, I'm afraid, so we'll have to keep going. I'll briefly mention in the last few slides some of the kind of odds and sods we get around the Northern Irish coastline. They're worth a mention. Sei whale is one, because sei whale is a bizarre species to get anywhere. It's very uncommon around the coast of Ireland, very uncommon in European waters. But two stranding of sei whale have occurred in the past couple of decades on the Northern Irish coastline. Sei whales are kind of bigger than minke whales, smaller than fin whales, and a bit of an enigmatic species. We don't really know much about them other than they crop up in kind of groups from time to time. But in 2013 and 2006, with individual sei whales stranded, and both of them, I think, stranded and died. So they live stranded and died, but just an unusual occurrence because we don't record them offshore during surveys almost ever. So what's drawing them to Northern Ireland? Who knows? It's worth mentioning humpback whales quickly, because you can see from the map here that there have been a scattering of humpback whale sightings. We tend to, when we think of humpback whales, relate it much more to the south and southwest coast of Ireland, where they feed on sprat and herring. But there are herring in the Irish Sea and up around the County Down coast, certainly. Here's a picture of a humpback whale off Bangor Marina in 2011. That photo was taken by Ross MacDonald. And then last year, was it last year? I think it was last year. This bit of footage showed up, and this was taken off Larne. And what you see there splashing in the background is a humpback whale splashing its tail fluke. And it did that for about 20 minutes just off the Larne marker buoy, and was spotted by this guy Neil, who was actually bird watching at the time. So it just shows you that's kind of, animals can turn up at any point, anywhere around the coastline. Here's another oddity that was spotted a few years ago off the Antrim coast. And if any of you know your whales and dolphins, you'll immediately recognize this as a white whale, or a beluga, which is an Arctic species. And this single animal popped up off the Antrim coastline. And luckily, there was again some birders, I think, who managed to get a bit of footage of it and positively identify it. And how about this? Another Arctic visitor. This is a bowhead whale. The Carlingford Lough pilots were escorting a ship out of harbour in 2016. They saw this weird-looking lump on the surface of the water, and fortuitously, they had a digital camera in their hand. They took some photos, and were able to get some nice shots and identified as a juvenile bowhead whale, another Arctic species, many thousands of miles out of where we would normally expect to find it. So the sea being the sea, almost anything can crop up at any time, anywhere, because it's all interlinked. It's one ocean. So you can get these species covering vast distances and randomly popping up when you least expect them. I'll leave you with this one because in my original list, I had a question mark beside sperm whale because we've never seen a sperm whale alive in Northern Irish waters. But during a survey in 2007, noises such as this were heard. I don't know if you can just about make out that sound. I'll enlarge this. And although, excuse me. Although we have never and still haven't seen them alive in Northern Irish waters, those clicks are so distinctive. We were able to say that, yes, those were sperm whale clicks, and those animals were in the deep water off the back of Rathlin Island. Remember, that deep area goes down to about 250 metres. And we do know that sperm whales occasionally come in from their normal haunts off the shelf slopes way to the west of Ireland, where they live in waters down to 3,000 metres depth. But they'll come into the kind of deeper waters off the coast of Scotland and apparently at the back of Rathlin, probably in search of their favourite food, which is squid. So it helps to keep an eye out, and indeed sometimes to keep an ear out, and get involved in recording whales, dolphins and porpoises around the Northern Irish coastline. How do I do that? Well, we have a website at www.iwdg.ie, and there you can log your strandings and your sightings, hopefully supported by a photograph. That would be the ideal. But if not, certainly for the sightings, you can submit a description of what you saw to help us identify what it was. We also have our new reporting app, which enables you to do all that on your smartphone without ever having to go home to your computer. So the new app allows you to report your strandings, log your sightings, and also log your effort watches if you decide to volunteer on that front. And with that, I think I've withered on enough. And if you have any questions or queries, now is your time.
Dave, I have a few questions here just coming through on the chat. Thank you so much. Just firstly, that was really fascinating. I actually really enjoyed that. A few questions I'm going to go through. If I can find the chat. Where's my chat actually gone to? Let's see. Sorry. Well, here they are. Moved over to the other side. So a question here from Bridie. Why are they called killer whales? When strictly speaking, they are orcas, dolphins, and killers of whales.
Yeah, well, that's where the name came from. So killer whale is really the name we think originated with the Norwegians. Basically, the background of the name is they're whale killers. So they're one of their top, they are indeed the top predator in the sea. They're capable of killing great white sharks. They're capable of killing whales. And they do so not in our waters, but in other waters. They will hunt down and kill even quite large animals. Indeed, there used to be a small group of killer whales off the port of Eden in Australia who used to help the local whalers by rounding up whales as big as blue whales and rounding them up and driving them into the harbour where the whalers would kill the whales. They'd let them sink to the bottom. The killer whales would feed on the tongue of the dead whales. And then a few days later, as they decomposed, the whales would rise back up to the surface and the whalers would reclaim the rest of the corpse. And that went on for many years until we think what happened was actually those whales started getting killed by different whalers down in the Antarctic when they tried the same trick. So they're whale killers. People get very caught up about killer whales and the name killer whales. I think it's a perfectly good name for them. But they don't go around eating humans. To best of my knowledge, there's never been outside of captivity an instance of killer whales attacking a human.
I have another question. Thanks. I have another question here from Patrick, which is an interesting one. Is Fungi the dolphin, the one in Dingle Bay, is a single individual, or is there any truth to the rumor that he is an imposter, passed off as the original to protect the local tourist industry?
Well, you need to up your conspiracy theories because Fungi is long gone. Fungi has been gone now for a couple of years.
Oh.
He disappeared finally, I think it was about 2 years ago, and he is no more. So now there are no, if you go down to Dingle, you can't see fungi anymore. You can go out and look at the cliffs instead. Yes, well, I mean, if anyone was going to bring in a cartload of dolphins and pawn them off as the same animal, Kerry men would be the people to do it. But no, I think fungi was just fungi. We know he was fungi because we identified him from scars and nicks on his dorsal fin and body. So it was the same animal when he first arrived. He was probably about 25 years old. He stayed for another 25 odd years. So he was about 50, maybe a bit older when he disappeared. So the one animal, one of these solitary dolphins that very much just stayed put and put up with all the shenanigans that grew up around him. A one dolphin whale watching industry.
Thanks for that. What happened? He just died, fungi, then, did he?
We don't know. He just disappeared.
So that was it. Oh, it's sad, isn't it?
He was never going to live forever. Anyway, don't cry too much. There are millions made, I'd say.
Just a comment. There was a comment here just from Eileen about ghost gear just being a problem for cetaceans. She said about the orca Lulu. It was killed in fishing gear.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's lots of threats to cetaceans around the coastline. Everything from noise to pollutions, which I mentioned with the killer whales, to bycatch and fishing gear, either creel nets creel ropes, such as for the minke whale. Still, harbour porpoise, about 1,500 harbour porpoise, maybe 2,000 are killed every year around the coast of the UK and Ireland in set nets for fisheries. It's a problem. They're caught in trawls as well. So it's one of many pressures that these animals have to endure.
The other one was, are any signs that we can listen out for above the water? This is from Roshi, what without a hydrophone for any of the cetacean species?
Well, I mean, if you're close enough to them, you'll hear them all.
The puffing or whatever.
Yeah, one of the old names for the harbour porpoise is the puffing pig, and that's because if you're within earshot of a porpoise, what you'll hear is every time it comes to the surface, it lets out this short little blow. So they called it the puffing pig. So for sure you'll hear them if you're close enough, but you have to be pretty close to be close enough. Other than that, the kind of visual cues are splashes on the surface, particularly for dolphins and whales, and the blow if it's a large whale.
Or log on to the app and see if there's been any sightings, and then go to those places and actually see if you can see.
You can see where the local action is happening.
Yeah. This is a good question too from Rona. Why do some dolphins choose to be solitary as opposed to continuing to live in a pod?
Yeah, we don't know. Is the short answer to that. Maybe it's that they're driven out of their kind of social circle, their group, and they seek out the company of humans as a surrogate for that. We just don't know. So a lot of it's a hypothesis. But it's not, most species don't do it. Occasionally you get common dolphins, but they rarely interact with humans like bottlenose dolphins do. It's really a bottlenose dolphin phenomenon, this solitary dolphin business, in this neck of the woods. And it's really just that one species. Probably they're highly intelligent. They just, for whatever reason, their drivers, their internal behavioural drivers, drive them to do that. And around the coast of Ireland, there's been probably half a dozen, maybe approaching a dozen different cases of solitary bottlenose dolphins over the years.
And of course, just another question, from Bridie about climate change, obviously. How will that influence our sightings again? Will affect maybe different species coming into our waters?
Well, we're still trying to figure it out. I mean, already we see it with species like the white-beaked dolphin, which is common in the North Sea. And it used to be, certainly from the older data, it seemed to be more common in the Irish Sea and around the coastline. Definitely, it's becoming less and less common. It's a colder water species, so it's retreating northward as the waters around our shores heat up. What we are seeing is more of the warmer water favoured species, such as common dolphins and striped dolphins. We're seeing those on an increasing basis. And they're probably, you know, in terms of common dolphins and white-beaked dolphins, common dolphins probably outcompete white-beaked dolphins, so the two of them do come together. So we can expect to see more of that kind of change as water temperatures rise around the coastline. The cold water species will retreat northward. The warmer water species will encroach from the south up northwards as well.
Thanks, Dave. Other question was, yes, it's Claire. Just wanted to know about the ferry surveys from Belfast. Are those open to the public? I believe those ferry surveys are open to the public, are they? Or are they?
They are. We're always looking for volunteers. If you keep an eye on our Facebook page, we'll put out notification there. We had a bit of a hiatus during COVID. Obviously, we couldn't run them. We're trying to get them back up and running, but we've had a few issues surrounding access and stuff like that. But we're optimistic in the next few months, the Belfast route will be up and running again. So keep an eye on the Facebook page.
Perfect.
Plan.
And the phone number for Strand Inside, and that's again on the website and everything.
It's got, yes.
So
if you go to
DG.ie,
if it's a dead stranding, you can just log your information straight on with the photo. If it's a live stranding, there's a live stranding hotline there. And indeed, we're involved in a project in Northern Ireland to coordinate live strandings here. But in Northern Ireland, it's a very rare thing. We get less than one live stranding per annum. So, which is kind of good in a way, because nobody wants to be dealing with stranded animals on the beach. It's no fun. But at least we will have the kit available, and we will have the hotline available. And so something can be done when it does occur.
Brilliant. Those are all the questions in the chat. If anybody else has a question they'd like to ask, do they want to just raise their hand using those reactions at the bottom? And then you can just unmute yourself. I'll just, if I'll have a wee look here and see if anyone has a question they want to ask. If you just want to use the reactions, as in raise the hand and the reactions. See if anybody has any other questions.
We've stunned them into silence.
No, nobody has any questions. No. Oh, okay. Aileen has a question. Aileen, do you want to unmute? You can ask Dave.
Is that me unmuted?
Yes, that's you unmuted. Yeah.
Thank you. Very interesting. Thank you so much. I live in Bangor, and we had the bottlenose whale stranded last year, or washed in last year. I just wondered, in terms, I know I asked about pollution before, but in terms of the criteria for doing these necropsies and the investigation into reasons why animals are stranding, have you got any sort of conclusions on the findings from reports, or is there any type of pattern, or are we looking at pollution being a major factor?
Well, it depends on species. That bottlenose whale didn't get necropsied, mainly probably because it was too big and too inaccessible. Dara and AFBI do necropsies on a certain proportion of stranded animals if they strand fresh, but they're more likely to do necropsies on the likes of harbour porpoise, for example, and bottlenose dolphin. But bottlenose dolphin rarely strand. And some of that information during the talk was derived from that data. So the results of postmortems on harbour porpoise show that a reasonable number of them are being killed by bottlenose dolphins. In a broader scope, it really depends on species, time of year. There's a whole plethora of things. Certainly from the killer whales, that whole story of the tragedy of their lack of breeding really is a story of necropsy data, which showed that they carry some of the highest burdens of pollutants. These are PCBs, so there were pollutants used. Well, there were chemicals used in the electronics industry years ago, but they were banned in the kind of 80s, 90s. But they're still there. That's the problem with these pollutants, even decades and maybe centuries after they're banned, they're still there in the water, and they work their way up through the food chain. So they don't bother the likes of crabs, and they don't bother the likes of pelagic fish. But when you get high up enough in the food chain, they concentrate so much as they accumulate, so that the top predators suffer the consequences of high burdens. And some of the killer whales that have been post-mortemed around the coast of the UK and Ireland have carried some of the, essentially, the best way to describe it is if
Toxic.
they were being designated, they'd be designated as toxic waste. They were that polluted. And so they hadn't a chance. And that's what's done in their breeding potential and ultimately led to their extinction, their local extinction around the coast of Britain and Ireland.
Is there anything that would be done in terms of passing that information on to try and make, I know we've got the legacy of pollutants, but is there anything that can be done? I know that you would be a lot of monitoring and recording of data. Does it get used in a way to sort of try and promote a change in practice?
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason we collect all of this data really is to affect change, to feed into conservation plans, to affect policy. So if you look at the legacy of pollutants, it's too late for the PCBs. They're there, and there's almost nothing we can do about them until they somehow make their way out of the ocean ecosystem. It's not just a UK and Ireland problem. It's a global issue of PCBs. That has kind of flagged, I suppose, that issue, in that you can't do much about what we call legacy pollutants, but you can scan a whole plethora of new and upcoming chemicals to see whether they've the potential to become problems in the future. And that's quite a big body of research that's going on at the moment. So these, emerging chemicals of concern is what they're called. So there's lots of research now into scanning a whole range of chemicals, from medicines to industrial chemicals to pharmaceuticals to farming chemicals, to see whether they have the potential to become future PCB-like problems. So I suppose that's one good. It's a bit late now for the killer whales, but it's one good outcome of that kind of area of research.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. I have, it's not Susie, but we've got...
It could be Susie.
It's not. It's okay.
Be Susie if you want to be.
I'm going to mute Mr. Reid.
Yes, Dave. Thanks very much for that talk. It was really good. Yes, and it's Simon using Susie's computer, so just made it difficult for you. My question, I have two questions really. I was lucky enough to be out wing foiling probably about 6 months ago in Browns Bay, the north end of Islandmagee. And there was a group of about 25 bottlenose dolphin. So that was a great experience, unbelievable experience. And they stopped off the headland and were just going in like in really tight group in various different directions. And I just sort of dropped my wing and just sort of sat in the water very close to them. Were they feeding at the time, do you think? Or I was just wondering what they were up to?
I don't know, because I didn't see them. But I mean, it's definitely one of the behaviors. They're very social animals, so they engage in a whole rake of behaviors. Generally, if they're feeding, you'll see them quite often moving purposefully at the surface, all in, or rushing at the surface. With bottlenose dolphins, it's hard because they do such a mishmash of behaviors. It's hard at any given time to figure out what the hell they're at. But for things like common dolphins, they do tend to engage in the same pattern of behavior depending on what they're doing. So for common dolphins, for example, if you see them rushing at the surface and heading kind of group-like in a certain direction, that generally would be associated with feeding, especially if they're accompanied by feeding birds like gannets overhead. But they engage in a whole rake of behaviors, some of them quite naughty, I might add. So who knows what they might have been at, but yeah.
And I suppose the other important one is because the foil is so quiet in the water, I was also conscious that I didn't want to hit one of them. The chances, I would imagine they more than likely would hear me, because quite recently I've come close to hitting a few seals because the foil is so quiet. So I wonder, is that something you've come across more often, because there's far more foils in the water these days?
Yeah, it is a potential issue because they're quite quick and they're very silent. And you can hit them. Would they hear you? Not necessarily, because it wouldn't be producing much of an acoustic signature. So yeah, it is an issue. And if you do hit one, you'll come off the worst for it.
Fair enough. Okay. I don't feel as bad then. Thanks very much. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Just a few questions here in the chat. Last ones here, Dave, and then I'll just close tonight's talk. A question from Oshing. Why are so many cetacean species seen at Rathlin and round, that sort of north coast? What's the reason for that?
It's probably largely to do with foraging opportunity. I mean, it could also be, I'm guessing largely to do with foraging, but also because that north coast area, if you go up to the north coast and you look at the lay of the land, well, actually the lay of the sea, you'll see it stretches out then. You have deep water habitat directly behind Rathlin. You have the whole area north of Rathlin and the north coast stretching up along the west coast of Scotland, which is one of the hotbeds for cetacean action around the UK and Ireland. So it's just a very busy area. Why the dolphins are using the north coast more now than they were previously is a good question, because to be honest with you, we're not quite sure. They were always there, but it seems over the past decade or so they're becoming more abundant, or at least more regular in sightings. But as I mentioned earlier, we see kind of similar things happening in other species where they just change the areas they use. It could be for a whole gamut of reasons. You tend to think it's related to food and food availability, but it could also be related to disturbance or other aspects in the environment that we haven't twigged yet.
Thanks, Steve. And last one before I close, where would you go this month to see some of these ocean giants?
Well,
Strangford Lough to see the two resident ones is your best bet.
If you want a surefire thing, go and stand at the end of the pier in Portaferry or Strangford, you'll see them.
Yeah.
Really, you kind of need to keep an eye on the social media and on the sightings, but the most promising areas are the ones I mentioned.
Coast.
The north coast, anywhere around Ballycastle, Portrush, as far as Port Stewart. There's a number of operators there now doing boat trips up around Rathlin, places like that, and they regularly see bottlenose dolphins. For harbour porpoise, you'll not do any better than right beside the Ulster Wildlife Reserve at Port Muck. Off Island Magee, which has the highest rate of porpoise sightings.
We had dolphins there this week. We did actually.
Common dolphins there during the week, and then for our harbour porpoise, it's got the highest harbour porpoise sightings rate of any of the sites around Northern Ireland. So
didn't know that. There you go. Yeah, that's a good fact, isn't it? Thank you so much, Steve. Everyone, just lots of nice comments here. Thanks, Steve. Very interesting, very enjoyable, interesting talk. Thank you so much. That's from Anne-Marie and Peter and Francis. Thanks, Steve. Very enjoyable, really interesting. Stephen, fascinating. From Rona, really interesting. That's from Oshing. That was fantastic, Dave. Thanks for that.
Thanks for the invite. And if you want to find out more, just visit us online, either on our Facebook page or at the website iwdd.ie.
I am just going to finally just share some upcoming talks, just in case anyone is interested. We have a few more left here, so I'll just share my screen with you, and you can see what else we have left that you might be interested in coming along to. All of the talks are free for Ulster Wildlife members and £3 for non-members. So our next one on Valentine's Day is all about butterflies and what to plant for them and what species you can attract to your garden with Rosemary. And then we've got Katie, who's our bee expert. She'll be talking about how to get your garden buzzing for bees. And Rachel, our marine conservation manager, will be looking at our work to bring back native oysters to Northern Ireland and some of the fascinating species that we've actually discovered in our oyster nurseries, from bringing back these species from eels to these little creatures here, which are nudibranchs, which are really beautiful. We've also got guest speakers, Emer Rooney in March from the Raptor Study Group, who will be telling you all about raptors and how you can get involved in efforts to safeguard our raptors. And finally, Damien from Cedar, who will be talking about damsels and dragonflies, and what we've been discovering there through the Irish Dragonfly Survey, which I know Dave is also involved in. So another,
I'll plug that one. So Damien's
So
Damon's
and
the
how you
other
can-
half of that collaboration.
Yeah, and how you can get involved in that survey, obviously, as well, because I think this the last year, Dave, of the coming up
This
to
is
the Irish
final year
Dragonfly survey.
of the Irish of Dragonfly Ireland, but it's
Survey.
not the final years. You know, we'll be encouraging people to adopt sites and keep monitoring their dragonflies and damselflies after this main survey is over.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think there's like a great little, but Damien will go through that little identification training course and everything. So you'll find all about that in that one. So do book for these, because we have a limit that we can have for these talks. We can only have up to 100 on these talks. So do book them. But all of them will be shared with members on a playlist afterwards, so you can watch them back at any time. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us tonight. That was really interesting. Really enjoyed that. This talk is recorded. It will be available if you wanted to look back on it. We'll be sharing that with you afterwards as well. So I think that's it. Thanks everyone. Just more comments in. Just thanks, very interesting. That was from Robbie and Claire. Thank you. Really enjoyed it, from Barbara. So yeah, we'll have you back again, Dave. We'll have you back again. Yeah.
Super.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great evening, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.